Hi, I'm Mike Gridley, and welcome to PowerBoat Television.
Whoa, that's my job now. Hi, I'm Drew McMillan, and welcome to PowerBoat Television.
I still got it.
If you're like me, you have a tough time not craning your neck and staring when you see a beautiful classic or antique boat float past. These incredible works of art and craftsmanship have shaped the history of recreational boating as we know it. Every single antique boat has a story to tell. Today on PowerBoat Television, we are in Port Carling, Ontario on Lake Muskoka, where it's National Vintage Boating Day. We're gonna go inside some of these boats to hear their stories firsthand.
This is the year, unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to cancel the ACBS Vintage Show in July. That would be in Gravenhurst. So the idea this year was to celebrate vintage boats and get on the water and use them and do a parade. So starting with that, we expanded it. Let's create a national vintage boating day and keep going forward. So we have 2 parades of vintage boats, wood and classic fiberglass and everything going on here in Muskoka out of Port Carling. One on Lake Muskoka, one on Lake Rosso. But there's also other events taking place in Gloucester Pool and in the Kawartha Lakes area on the same date here on the 8th. The other groups that are involved elsewhere in the province are the Trent Severn Antique and Classic Boat Club and the Maple Leaf Antique Outboard Club. So we've got a lot of people that are interested in vintage boating that are on the water having some fun today. You'll see a range of everything from some really wonderful long deck launches that go back to the 20s and 30s, right up to fiberglass Donzi. So with our organization, you can be a member and take part in the shows and all that with a boat that's 25 years or older, whether it's fiberglass, wood, aluminum, whatever the case may be. This was the center of cottaging for a lot of wealthy people, whether they came from Toronto or came out of major American cities and came up here by train and used the steamers like the Seguin and all that to get around to their cottages. As the wealthy cottagers spent more time here, they started to commission locals to build boats for them. So whether it was Shields or Minette, whether it was Duke, Gravette family, quite a few names, Johnson, over the years, some absolutely wonderful boats were built here. Built in Port Carling, built in Gravenhurst, built in Bala. Port Carling, certainly the hub, so there's a tremendous history. And one of the things with all these wonderful old boats here is with boathouses of Muskoka, a lot of them were kept indoors and survived, so that started it.
As Mike mentioned earlier, it's not just classic wood that's populating a lot of these antique shows anymore. There's tons of great fiberglass boats. We're going to take a look at a couple of them in detail.
Yeah, the boat, my son Jeff found it on Kijiji way back in 2007. My father-in-law, Jeff, and I drove from Whitby down to Charleston, South Carolina, picked the boat up. My wife, Margie, and Kate said, pour some old gas over it and burn it. It was really, really, really bad. The boat was made in Long Beach, California by PowerCat, and it's called a PowerCat Bahama. The boat is a 16-foot. It's very, very beamy. It's 8 foot wide for racing in the ocean. And the PowerCat got its racing start from racing from Long Beach, California, up to Seattle, Washington, and back in the 60s. There's no subfloor. The floor is actually the bottom of the boat. So when you feel the water pounding, like the water's right below your feet. The outboards are twin 1961 Mercury DR direct reverse 800s, which is 80 horsepower. During the 2006 Toronto Boat Show, I had an elderly gentleman come up to me. He says, well, I think you should come to my barn in Aurelia and pick up twin white 6-cylinder Mercs, and one's counter-rotating. And of course, he had me at counter-rotating. They were a special build from Mercury, and that action counter-rotating lifts the back of the boat up. So a counter-rotating pair is absolutely unbelievable to find. So I had a restoration done in 2007. The deck was separated from the hull. Another friend of mine in the Antique Boat Club restored it and painted it. Jeff and I rigged it with the gauges and the steering and mounted the motors. Well, it took me a while to learn to drive it because it's so unique. And of course, there's no gear shift with a direct drive motor. You know, you turn them on and you're gone. The physical weight of the driver and the motors and the beaminess of the boat, you never feel unsafe in it.
Every antique boat has a story, which makes owning them even more meaningful, especially when you have the chance to share that story with other collectors and members of the Antique and Classic Boat Society. Another antique boat we spent some time with today has a modern twist to its story, and it belongs to a very familiar face.
People get introduced to it all different ways. We had done the show and we're wrapping up in what was called the Field of Dreams, where everybody would go and buy a restored boat or look for a hulk to restore. We were in between boats. We just sold our cruiser that was on the show so much, looking for a trailer boat, and walked around the corner and my wife pointed at this restored Sunflash and went, "Look at that." So we bought it. So we've been involved in the antique boat community ever since. For a lot of us, we grew up with boats in mind that bring back the background. You're older with Minette Shields, with a Gravette, with a Duke, whatever the brand of the boat was, or you grew up with a Peterborough Cedar Strip or a Lakefield, or you had, like I'm restoring now, a classic 72 Checkmate 15-foot ski boat with a Merc Tower power on it. That's my era of boats when I was a teenager. This boat started life as a 1964 Gravette Sunflash, 17-foot boat. They built Sunflashes from the 50s right through into the 70s in a variety of different sizes and configurations. This was undertaken as a restoration by a couple here in Ontario in 2009-10. And the original boat was so rotten, they actually used it as a pattern. There was just not enough left there to restore. So all the original hardware, steering, gear, shift, all that came off the boat. A new boat was designed, but this is what they call a restored and modified boat. So it has had more rake, sporty look instead of straight up and down in the stem. There's a curve to the deck instead of flat. There's a bit of a tumble hone where the back of the boat's a little rounded in, so the boat's a little bit longer. It's an 18-foot boat now. The windshield's a custom windshield. The original power on this boat was a 1964 Mercruiser 4-cylinder with MR1 drive on it. This has been repowered with a 4.3-liter, 205 horsepower with an Alpha 1, so it's a 50-mile-an-hour classic boat. The community's expanded beyond the preservation of wooden boats to the preservation of all the great boats that came before now, whether it's a Larson from the 50s or a Glastron, whatever the case may be. A lot of great old J-Craft ski boats that were built here in Ontario. They have a huge following and are being restored on an ongoing basis.
Later in the show, we're invited to a friend's boathouse to check out one of the most elaborate collections I have ever seen. You will definitely want to stay tuned for this one.
And since it's so small and light, it really does feel very quick, which is great to get you from launch to cast in a hurry.
Looking for a new or used boat? BoatBuys.com has over 30,000 boats listed with reviews, tests, buyer's guides, and more. Visit BoatBuys.com.
For 2021, Princecraft is kicking things up to the max. With 3 all-new Max models that make a host of previously optional features standard to bring you maximum value at a great low price. At just 39 grand Canadian, with a trailer and a cover and a bimini, this Sport 172 Max does all of that in a wicked, versatile, family-friendly, easy-to-tow fishing package.
Brand new this year, Princecraft's Max package is available in 2 different Hudson models and this Sport 172 Max, which is 17 feet, 5 inches long, with a 91-inch beam and a dry weight of 1,327 pounds.
Now, the name Sport feels like it's meant to cover a lot of bases. Skiing, fishing, cruising, basically anything you'd want to do with family. So to come through on that, and the promise of max value, the Sport 172 Max comes standard with carpeted stern and bow casting platforms, removable ski pylon for skiing or tubing, a stainless steel reboarding ladder, plus those bow cushions to add some comfort up front, and for all types of weather, a nice big bimini top.
Take out those bow cushions and we find large storage compartments for gear, a box that's perfect for your deep cycle batteries, plus a floor mount for a removable seat or casting pedestal, along with everything you'd need to mount an optional trolling motor. Twin roto-molded consoles with folding seats are protected by a nice big windshield with a hinged walkthrough. The passenger side features a small lockable glove box with a big open tray in front, plus a cup holder and small cell phone tray to the left. On the driver's side, the dash can be outfitted with an optional flush mount sonar system with plenty of flat space for more electronics. Without the touchscreen, our test model's tack, speedo, trim, and fuel gauges are well appointed, with switches and indicator lights beside the tiltable steering wheel. Easy access open storage is right at the driver's feet as well, with the whole console open underneath the wheel. In the floor is a lockable rod organizer to keep 4 rods at hand, but nice and secure with the bungee strap for when you're running and gunning from spot to spot. More rod storage is open in the gunnel to port, and to starboard is another storage compartment, which makes a great spot to store that ski pylon when it's not in use. The Sport 172 Max has a ton of freeboard, with a handy toe kick to lock you in when you're casting off either side.
And one of my favorite features that's making its way through the Princecraft line is this convertible aft casting platform. In this position here, you've got a couple of nice wide jump seats to easily fit 4 or even 5 or 6 behind the windshield. Fold it down and you've got this nice big raised casting platform with storage, a 17-gallon live well, and room underneath still to slide a tackle box to get it out of the way of anybody walking around the boat. Just awesome versatility in a 17-foot package.
On both sides of the stern are supports to mount downriggers, which is one of a few options on our test boat that'll push the price just over 40,000 Canadian. Power options on the Sport 172 Max range from 90 to 115 horsepower.
To keep your costs nice and manageable, this 90-horse Merc EXLPT is a great power option for this 17-foot package. Gets you up on plane in an instant with just about no bow rise, and it can still pull a skier or a tuber with a couple spotters on board.
3.9 seconds to plane was my best time with that 90 Merc. I hit an even 40.0 miles per hour top speed trimmed up with a full tank of gas. Although a better cruise in the Sport 172 Max was around 28 miles per hour, which was a super smooth ride in glass calm water.
With Princecraft's reverse chine hull design, this thing handles just as well as you'd hope that a 17-footer would. It's really quick and responsive, it bites into turns, and it's solid in a little bit of bumper chop. And since it's so small and light, it really does feel very quick, which is great to get you from launch to cast in a hurry.
That reverse chine also gives the boat more lift to get on plane quicker and means less resistance in the water. Crossing the camera boat's wakes to find some bumps gave me a real good sense of how solid this hull is, with 2.5mm thick aluminum throughout the bottom and twin plating from the bow back to midship and at the chines. And since it's one single piece of aluminum, it just eats up the shock from waves.
What's also great design from a boat manufacturer in Quebec is you get a nice high windshield that really does a great job of blocking the wind. Because these guys are worried about fishing deep into the season in a place where it gets pretty cold pretty quick. The concept of a boat you can fish and ski behind is nothing new, but what really impresses me is the value you get out of this Sport 172 Max. Just a hair over 40 grand with a trailer, tough to beat.
Unlike a fire extinguisher, you don't have to be aware there is a fire. E-light balls are always on alert.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for projects, tips, and DIYs, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes segments from the show. YouTube.com/PowerBoatTV.
According to Boat US Marine Insurance claims, fire is the 5th leading cause of boat loss. Over half of those fires are caused by an electrical system. Today, we tend to plug in more electronic devices than ever for both power and recharging. Boats don't often have a lot of 120-volt receptacles, especially if they're older. So, by the time you plug in a few simple, useful things like a light and a fan, you're out of receptacle power. And once you're out of spots to plug stuff into, what do you typically do? You add some of these. And a power bar could be one of the most dangerous things you can bring on a boat. Too many devices plugged in can overload a single circuit, at which point you'd expect the breaker to trip. But in some cases, especially with a loose connection, the load might not be enough to trip the breaker. On this 15-amp breaker, for example, it takes only 5 devices to create a 10-amp load. And if there's a loose connection either at the receptacle or the panel, the wire can heat up to the point of starting a fire. But the breaker never trips because the load hasn't exceeded the capacity. Most recreational vessels will have a fire extinguisher or 2 aboard. But what good are they if you're not aware there is an active fire? What if there was a new fire suppression technology? One that not only made you aware of an active fire, but could put it out before it got out of hand. This is an E-Lite automatic fire suppression bulb. It is completely autonomous and provides continuous coverage 24/7, day or night. The E-Lite fireball only activates when it comes in contact with a flame. It does not activate on elevated levels of heat. When flame comes in contact with the EFB, it will activate within 3 to 5 seconds. By dispersing monoammonium phosphate, a non-toxic and eco-friendly dry chemical, these balls can extinguish type A, B, and C rated fires. The 4-inch blue marine balls are designed for more humid environments where it can get damp, like a bilge or an engine bay. Red E-Lite fireballs are meant for any indoor location that remains dry, like a salon or master stateroom. 4-inch balls, regardless of color, provide 19 square feet of coverage. And if you need more, the larger 6-inch balls can provide up to 60 square feet of coverage with a maximum dispersion radius of 4.5 feet. To add this kind of passive fire protection, simply add an E-Lite fireball to any area of concern where a possible fire could occur. In this case, we're going to mount right over top of the electrical outlet. Unlike a fire extinguisher, you don't have to be aware there is a fire. E-Lite balls are always on alert. Whether you're away from the boat, or worse, sleeping on board, you might not be aware fires can start very quietly. If you're not aware of the fire, or worse, sleeping on the boat when a fire occurs, don't worry, the E-Lite balls have you covered.
We were invited to a friend's boathouse to check out his collection of antique boats, and this is no ordinary collection. Back in Muskoka, celebrating the Antique and Classic Boat Society's National Vintage Boating Day, we were invited to a friend's boathouse to check out his collection of antique boats, and this is no ordinary collection.
I think it's been really important to collect boats from different eras and different types of boats, but I've also been fortunate enough to collect boats that are typically one of a kind, where there was only one particular one made of that sort. They really are an art form, sort of like a painting. There might only be one done. I feel strongly about the aspect of keeping the story alive and keeping the boats here. In fact, I really just think of myself as a caretaker. I'm looking after them in my lifetime as 2 or 3 generations have looked after them before I came across them. Eaglet is a 1927 Minette Shields. It spent all of its life on the Muskoka Lakes. It was actually up just at the entrance to Little Lake Joe. And it's a boat that I've had for probably 25 years. And it's absolutely an elegant launch. I feel very fortunate to have it. And in the case of Minette Shields, he was really known as the Rolls-Royce of boat builders. When Minette Shields built a boat, it was absolutely done perfectly. But Eaglet was a one-off at 36 feet. It was made with a raised deck to accommodate a larger engine. And because Minette Shields had built a boat for Henry Rolls of Rolls-Royce, that relationship helped Mr. Minette end up with things like a Rolls-Royce steering wheel and a Rolls-Royce dash panel. So those little finishing touches, I think, have really made a difference in what makes a Minette Shields boat above and beyond every other boat. Rainbow 9 is a very interesting boat that has a great lineage to it. It was first brought to Canada in 1934 by a gentleman named Harry Greening, who had won world championships as a Canadian racer. But prior to coming to Canada, Rainbow 9 was known in the United States as Packard Princecraft 2. And it was a boat that set a world record in 1925, it was built in 1922, and was purchased by a gentleman who invented the Liberty aircraft engine, Colonel Jesse Vincent. And with 640 horsepower with a V12 engine, it runs like a bear. It's a great boat to take out. Curlew has great history as well. It was built in 1936. It was the very first streamliner ever built. Curlew was introduced to Canada by John Hacker, a very well-known designer from Detroit. A gentleman named Fred Burgess from Toronto, who had a cottage in Muskoka, wanted to have a boat built by Ditchburn. But Ditchburn was kind of shaky, in and out of business. He went to Gravette, who was almost out of business at that point in the 30s, and they built Curlew, being the longest, the first, the only one that was pointed at both ends. And it became such a success that that led to the hundreds of streamliners that were built right up through the late 1950s. So Curlew being the beginning of that whole era, to me, was a very significant boat. I'm particularly pleased that my daughter's been interested in the boats. Now I'm more enthused that her children are interested in the boats. And so it's become a great family event for us to spend time on the water together.
Clary is a 1920 Hutchison, and it was actually built and raced down on the Great Lakes. It's been up here in Muskoka for, gosh, almost 25 years. And I've been driving this boat since I was probably 10 years old. It's amazing to be able to go out and do it and enjoy it with my kids now.
And he was a kid.
And I was a kid. Clary's funny because it's not a Muskoka boat, but I think this has such a sentimental value to our whole family. So when my dad was young as a kid, his father took him to watch the Great Lakes racing circuit on Lake Ontario. So he actually grew up watching this boat be raced and just sort of watched and sort of followed where this boat traveled and who owned the boat, and finally had the opportunity to purchase it. And it was really sort of the first boat that he purchased and invested in, and that we all enjoy it. They don't sit here, we get out and we use them. So many of the boats people have at their cottages, the driver's up front, and so you've got all the power behind you, but in this case, the power is actually in front of you. So it makes it easier to pivot where the boat's actually going to go. I think people are pretty excited about the opportunity to see the boats, they know the boat. So for people who have been around antique boats in Muskoka for a long period of time, it's sort of like people who understand paintings, right? They know the history of the boats, it's neat to see them up close. All of these boats are out all of the time, they're out of the boathouse, they don't just sit here. So it's really great to be able to go out and participate like we did this morning, and be able to take a few of them out of the boathouse. But it's also neat to see other people bring their boats around, and the camaraderie and the community that I think emerges around boating and around the lakes in general is something that's actually really lovely for everyone.
Well, Mike, first National Vintage Boating Day. How'd you think it went?
I think that went pretty good. We've had a short amount of time to promote it. For a first, this has been great. The plan going forward is to make this national, so if people are interested in starting their own where they can just get out and enjoy your vintage boats. We'll be putting information up on our website, acbs.ca. And we're also hoping to work with ACBS International to make this a North America-wide, if you will.
Well, it was really a treat to ride along with you and see some of these great boats in action in right where they were manufactured.
This one's not too many kilometers away from where it was manufactured, and it's been great. It's fun, Drew, to be back on the show after a little bit of an absence, and maybe we'll get to do it again.
Absolutely, I can't wait. Great to see you, and thanks so much for having us.